Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Fazzini. We are presented by CLNS Media and The Athletic. Today on the show, it is Wednesday, November 1st, and we have good friend of the program, Cole Zwicker, on for his weekly appearance. Cole, how's it going, buddy? You had an awesome time this weekend up at Seattle watching the Texans and Seahawks play. Over the last couple of days, I've been watching Stranger Things and then seen a couple of movies. There hasn't been a ton of time for basketball for us, I feel like.
Yeah, I took about 4 days off from watching the NBA. I was like, screw it. You know, I was watching like 5 games a day. It's like, I'm going to go to the Seahawks game. And then I came back and ended up watching Stranger Things. I binged on it for literally 2 nights in a row. Got through all season 1. About to start season 2. Fired up for it.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to spend your time. Stranger Things is just phenomenal. It's amazing. Just wait until you see Steve Harrington this season. Steve Harrington is by far the best character in the show. All right.
I'm excited, man.
Let's go on ahead and kind of get into the teeth of this podcast here. What we're going to talk about today, as usual, are going to be 2 parts here. We're going to first talk about NBA options and some notable players who had their rookie options either exercised or declined. And then second, we are going to talk about NBA draft wings for the 2018 NBA draft. Kind of an interesting crop, in my opinion. Heavy on the athleticism. A little bit of question on some of the skill there, but we'll talk about that more in depth when we get there. First, let's start with the NBA option process. So, Cole, you do know this cap stuff a little bit better than I do, I would say. So I'm going to kind of give the floor to you and kind of let you explain how the NBA option process works here for players on rookie contracts.
Sure, for every rookie contract, for rookie scale deals in the first round, years 3 and 4 are team options that have to be exercised by October 31st of the previous year. So right now we're talking about third-year players and fourth-year players. You rarely ever see third-year guys get their options declined just because it's pretty early in the process. It's usually those fourth years that it comes into
this
play. Year. Third-year guys?
Yeah.
Did we?
Had 2 this year that got declined.
I must have gone wrong in my notes. So that's pretty novel. I mean, I know it's novel that there's 2 top 5 picks that got their options declined. That rarely ever happens.
Yeah.
In the same class with Okafor and Hezonja. Those are pretty headlining things. So basically, what happens is if you decline your option, that team can only sign that player for the amount of what he would have earned in that final year of that option. So it restricts what you're going to pay them, of course. But at the same time, if you're declining their option, they're probably not going to be worth that amount anyway. At least that's the brain trust. That's the thought process behind it. So you sacrifice that, the player becomes an unrestricted free agent. And yeah, again, you can't sign that player for more than the amount of the option that he would have earned in that year that was declined. So yeah, it was pretty nuts. I mean, Okafor and Hezonja obviously headlined this group. We also had McCullough, Rashad Vaughn, Kevon Looney, Huestis, and Brice Johnson on top of Baldwin, which we've already covered. So it was pretty crazy. Yeah,
so Brice Johnson and Wade Baldwin are the 2 third-year guys that had their options declined. So let's kind of talk about what the downside is of declining an option. You mentioned it in terms of what a team can offer them in the postseason and in the offseason, right? They can only go up to what the option number was. So Jahil Okafor next year, the 76ers or any team that trades for Jahlil Okafor can only offer him $6.2 or $6.3, somewhere in that range, $1 million next season, whereas the rest of the league can offer him whatever contract they want to offer him. And again, that player becomes an unrestricted free agent, not a restricted free agent. So what that means as well is that the value in terms of trades really diminishes because the player control aspect of these guys is now gone. They are unrestricted free agents next year if you had your player option or your team option, declined. And that's a very significant downside to any NBA team that is considering acquiring these guys, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, you compare, contrast New Orleans Rawle trade with a potential Jahlil Okafor trade. Okafor would be a limited rights free agent, like you just discussed, unrestricted, and any team that acquires him can only pay him up to that option amount as well. It's whoever had him under his rookie scale deal has that limitation built in, whereas, Dallas with New Orleans, I mean, they didn't sacrifice very much. We saw his trade value. I mean, depends on what you think of Justin Anderson, of course, but at least Dallas acquired his right of first refusal this offseason. Of course, he accepted the qualifying offer and will become an unrestricted free agent this following offseason. But you can see exactly what you pointed out. The team control is much lessened, and that diminishes the value.
Yeah, I mean, the Nerlens Noel situation is kind of a perfect example of how this process can kind of bear itself out in the negative, even if you pick up the option, right, and then trade a player. So Nerlens Noel takes his qualifying offer at, I think it was like $4.5 million or something like that, and ends up in a situation where he's an unrestricted free agent next offseason, which, again, Dallas now is in what could be a tricky spot to keep him, at least. It might not necessarily end up that way, but it could be a tricky spot to keep him, even if they do have his bird rights. And I think it's worth mentioning as well that all of these players who have their option years, or at least the third year option, the third year players right now who have their fourth year option declined, those guys all have bird rights, which means that their teams can go over the cap to sign them. They just can't offer more than what the contract was worth whenever they declined the option. So with that being in mind, I think that the first place to start here is with Jahlil Okafor. I am not surprised by this move. Again, he's probably not going to be worth $6.2 million next year, especially if he stays with Philly this entire year, just because he's not going to get the opportunity to play. I do think that what this says about him is that he essentially has very few suitors around the NBA that feel like it's worth committing to him or feel like he could be an asset going forward into perpetuity. Because if there were suitors out there that were willing to trade a second round pick for Okafor, like even like a, pick in the 35 to 45 range in the draft, I think Philly probably should have taken that deal as opposed to just declining his option and letting him get away in unrestricted free agency this year. So if teams are not even really willing to offer that, it's really hard for me to kind of think that Okafor is going to have a ton of value around the league, given where he is in Philadelphia right now.
Yeah, it's tough because Philadelphia does have incentive now to move him or to buy him out, just because that would clear extra cap room potentially this year to renegotiate and extend Robert Covington. So that gives him maybe he gets bought out for, I don't know, $2 million. That's $2 million extra that could go to Covington, and then they could structure that deal more money this year, bump that salary for Covington up, and then they can drop it by 40% and kind of just mess around and tinker with that on the latter half of the contract. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, I mean, the value, it's got to be tough. I mean, you have to expect that they've already sent out feelers to these teams and seen, okay, can we get anything of value? Can we get a second round pick? Would you trade a second round pick? Let's say it can be top 45. Would you trade a top 45 pick for Jahlil Okafor right now?
I think that it does depend on team situation, but in a lot of cases, sure, I certainly would. I mean, think about who you're getting at pick 45 right now. I don't really see how Jahlil Okafor isn't a better risk to take, even at $6.2 million next year, plus restricted free agency rights in the future, if you would have dealt for him before the option deadline, than a number 45 overall pick. I think that that's where we start to get into the area where Okafor exceeds the value. We can say that Jahlil Okafor is not a good basketball player right now in the NBA. I think that's probably fair. We can also say that, the number 45 pick does not exceed the value of Jahlil Okafor, and I would probably be willing to trade that pick for Okafor. I would probably be willing to trade number 35 for Okafor, to be honest, because I don't think he's that far from being a solid backup center. He might not be an average player right now, but I don't think he needs to do a crazy amount to where he can take advantage of second units off the bench and be successful.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at it statistically, if you're drafting it, pick 45 or after or even slightly before, what's the chance of that player becoming an NBA player? And I think Okafor still deserves to be on an NBA roster at some point, even at your fifth big. He at least has NBA level skills, his face-up game. He has some fluidity scoring. I wish he would just rebound the ball. I mean, that's all he really needs to do to be a backup center. I think he could have a high usage role in a backup role, ideally if he could rebound. But every time he gets on the floor recently, he's gotten his ass kicked on the glass. And if he's not bringing you anything besides the scoring, it's not that valuable. But again, I do think that he is an NBA player. It's just, in another situation, maybe you kick the tires. If you're the Bulls, for example, I know that's been the common kind of location for him, just because they don't have a ton of talent, they don't have a ton of offense. I don't see a lot of downside in trading a top maybe 45, maybe a pick in the 45 to 50 range. I don't know what their second round situation is, but obviously their own pick's going to be higher. So that's tough. I mean, you could see an argument for that.
So, like, in the last 3 years, the center closest to pick number 45 that has been taken in the NBA draft has been Walter Tavares, A.J. Hammonds, and Dakari Johnson. I think that we can all agree that, like, Jahil Okafor is a more valuable asset, even at $6.2 million next year, than any of those guys. Unless you just full-on believe that you are just not going to be a player or you're going to be a major player in free agency. I'm sorry. If you think you're going to be a major player in free agency and you want to keep that $6.2 million open, I get it. But where I start to run into issues, for instance, is with, maybe Chicago, right? Like, in Chicago has so much center depth that it's kind of coming out of their ass right now with Robin Lopez, Cristiano Felicio. I would try and play Lauri Markkanen some minutes at center. Bobby Portis is a player that exists who may or may not be on their roster soon that can play the center position. But to me, it's worth the flyer to get him back into a comfortable situation in Chicago. And, you're not going to have to give up a lot to really get him, in my opinion. So if I was Chicago and I'm already in a situation where, I don't have max cap space now after deciding to exercise all of my rookie contracts for next season, which we'll talk about in a minute here. Guys like Cameron Payne and Denzel Valentine and Bobby Portis and those guys. Now that they are only projected to have like right around $20 million in cap space, I'm not so sure that it wouldn't have made sense for them to take a chance on him. I'm not so sure it wouldn't have made sense for a team like, I don't know. I mean, Phoenix wants to get out and run, but I don't feel good about their center position right now. Like, there are just a few other teams out there that I'm just like, you know what? Why not take a shot on it and see what happens?
Yeah, and he looks somewhat slimmed down this year. I mean, at least his physique looks better. That's a positive quality for him moving forward. I know he's dealt with injuries in the past. So I'm not high on Okafor. I mean, I don't think anybody really objectively can be at this point, but he does have some talent to exhibit on an NBA level. So I wouldn't blame a team if they don't sacrifice a second-round pick for him, depending on how good you are at second-round picks. I'd much rather have Jordan Bell than Jahlil Okafor. So if you can get Jordan Bell at 38 or 39, I think he's a better player right now.
Sure.
But you can make arguments for Okafor for teams, for sure.
Sure. So, I mean, for instance, in the 2015 draft, just because we know a little bit more about what these guys are, the centers taken in the second round were Montrezl Harrell. I would call Jordan Mickey a center, to be honest, because I don't know if he has the perimeter skill to play anything else.
Sure.
Willie Hernan-Gomez, who's turned out really well. Rakeem Christmas. We've got Arturas Gudaitis. We've got Dakari Johnson. Satnam Singh. And I believe that Dimitrios Agravanis is basically limited to the center position if he would ever come over to the NBA. Hint, he's not coming over to the NBA. Cadillac Lane as well. So that's the second rounders. Like, that's the level you're talking about in terms of hit or miss quality. Willie Hernan-Gomez, I would say, is really the only hit from the 2015 draft. You could say maybe Montrezl Harrell, but he was 32, and I don't really think anyone's giving up pick 32 for Okafor at this stage. So, like, you can say past pick 34 or 35 just because those are a little bit less valuable than the top 5 picks in the second round. I just, like, if it was me and I was running a team, I would be willing to take a chance, but that was only if the option was there and I had potential to actually have upside on the deal. NBA teams now don't have any upside to getting Jahlil Okafor.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That's the best way to phrase it.
So let's go ahead and talk about Hezonja now, too. Mario Hezonja is a really tricky one because I think a lot of people kind of understood that he was a little bit of a project coming into the NBA. He was a little bit older than what I think people recognize whenever he was selected. I believe he was in his age 21 year when he was selected. He was either 20 or 21 at the time of selection. And that, maybe warped views a little bit, but I think that everyone understood it was going to take a little bit of time for him to adjust to the NBA game. It's gone horribly. Like, he has not been good at all in his 3 years. He's shown a little bit more this year. They're playing him as like kind of a small ball 4 who can stretch the floor and, use his size at 6'8" to, maybe at least have a chance against bigger players in the post. But overall, he has not been very good yet. Having said that, he's going to be a fascinating guy for me to at least take a chance on in, what John Hollinger called the second draft, right? Some of these guys who get bought out and you have a chance to get them young and, kind of develop them as prospects and see where they lay. So I get why Orlando did it. I think that they were in a spot where they were not going to get anything out of him going forward, given their roster construction, given the fact that Jonathan Isaac and Aaron Gordon and Jonathan Simmons and Evan Fournier can play some three, like Terrence Ross can play some three. They just didn't really have a whole lot of positional value for what Hezonja can bring, but I think he's a really interesting guy to take a chance on next year in free agency.
Yeah, and they have a new front office there, so they have no affiliation. They have no responsibility to him moving forward, so that's something to mention. I think a team like Golden State should kick the tires on Hezonja. Just the team like that, they can just figure it out. They can take in guys that can optimize their skill sets. That's the kind of situation he needs. It's just less is more. Let's just fill a specific role. I mean, he's a career 33% shooter from three. He can be better than that, I think, mechanically, all that stuff. If he just fixates on certain things and stops trying to press and doesn't have this pressure of living up to the hype, because he's clearly, I mean, I don't know how you want to define bust, but he's pretty much on the precipice of that. I mean, that's a really relative term, of course. Anthony Bennett's a bust. He's out of the league. Hezonja is on that course. So I think a team that knows how to optimize someone like that. I mean, he's a wing who can shoot hypothetically. I'm not sure what else he can really do. He's a decent passer at times, but he's not great. And defensively, he hasn't been great off ball, especially. So a team like the Warriors, take a pedigree shot on him, maybe a minimum salary or a little bit more next year, maybe on a one-year prove-it deal, see what you got. That's kind of how I think of him.
Sacramento was an interesting one to me too, just because they're going to get up and down. They're going to play a little bit faster tempo. And I feel like that's kind of an interesting fit. They apparently kicked the tires on him before he had this option declined. Again, now that he's had this option declined, I don't really see him having a whole lot of trade value around the league, because teams will only be able to offer him right around $5.2 million in the offseason. If they were to get him and he would be good for them, there's no way that he would be only getting $5.2 million. So again, there's not really an upside here for a team that would be looking to acquire Mario Hezonja. If I remember correctly, Orlando is not going to have cap space next year, so it doesn't really behoove them to buy him out either, right?
Yeah, no. I was talking about strictly through free agency next year. I don't think that I would trade much for him right now. I just don't think there's a lot of upside. If he's a wing and he ends up shooting like 42% from three in a limited sample and he looks pretty good, again, you might be priced out of that $6 or $5 million or whatever it was. That's unlikely. I think that's definitely an outlier positive scenario, but it's still possible. So I think strictly in free agency, I would maybe, if I was an elite team or an established team that knew how to optimize this guy, I would take a dice roll at a very low salary. Yeah,
I agree with you on that. Man, it's pretty surprising to me that in the era we are now, where wings who can shoot the basketball are in higher demand than ever, that he can't find a job is startling to me. And I know that he shot the ball poorly last year, but man, like he had athleticism in Europe. At least it showed his athleticism. And it just really hasn't translated to the NBA game at all. Like, I am shocked by how slow he looks on the floor regularly. And maybe it's the gears don't turn in his head fast enough and he doesn't react to what's happening around him fast enough, because you do occasionally see him go up for a pretty big dunk, or he'll get way above the rim sometimes and show that off, but he just doesn't apply his athleticism well to the NBA game.
Yeah, he's not a functional athlete, but this is, again, a guy that had ceiling outcome Klay Thompson comparisons coming into the draft. He had talent, and he was viewed pretty positively by a lot of people. I learned a lot from him, just investing so much in the shooting aspect with the defense not established. I mean, it was a dice roll. He had to really defend, I think, to be a really high-level NBA player, because you have that intersection between 3 and D. Didn't see a ton of playmaking from him, but yeah, the athleticism in Europe definitely shined a lot more than it has in the NBA.
Yeah, and maturity questions kind of abounded with him as well. Maybe he just hasn't quite figured it out from that perspective yet. I don't know. It's possible that he's just not good enough to play in the NBA, and he's going to be a star in Europe for years. We'll see. Let's talk about the Bulls, because, kind of going down this 2015 NBA draft here, they have the next guy who kind of had a difficult decision surrounding his name. Cameron Payne, the Bulls ended up exercising his option. I believe it was $2.9 million. I actually wrote a thing for The Athletic after he was injured this time, advocating not picking up that option. I don't really understand why they're even going down this road, especially given the fact that, again, if they would have declined Cameron Payne, and if they would have declined Bobby Portis, given the fact that it seems like Portis probably does not have a place on that team going forward, they could have gotten some pretty real cap space here. Like, they could have gotten $5 million in cap space and gotten up to $25 million in cap space next offseason.
Yeah, both of these guys were on my surprise list of guys that got their options picked up. Not really surprised as far as politically, because, again, they did sacrifice assets to get Payne. Drafted Portis, not relatively, first-round pick. I think it was just more of a political move, especially with Payne, just saying, not admitting to a mistake right away with that trade that was not objectively good at the time. I thought the same thing, again, with the Kings and Papagiannis. He was another guy we can get into. Of course, he's younger, and you're not going to, like, admit a mistake that quickly in the lottery. But I feel like that's kind of what we're dealing with Payne, is just the Bulls front office not wanting to come out and say, we screwed up by, trading capital for him. He hasn't been good. There's really been no evidence that he's been good in the NBA. He was a disaster in Summer League. So I get it from a political standpoint, but I totally agree with you. I think I would prefer cap space.
Yeah, and, like Bobby Portis, again, I don't know if there's really going to be a marketplace for him after the punch incident. So if there's no marketplace for him and they doesn't really have a place on your team anymore, so I don't really totally get the idea of keeping him around and keeping his option around. Maybe you think you can rehabilitate him a little bit, but there's just really not going to be a lot of time in that front court going forward, just because, as we mentioned earlier, they have so many pieces there. Chris Dunn, Jaren Grant, Denzel Valentine as well, they all got their options picked up. I don't think any of those guys are surprising, really, right?
No, I think you got to roll these guys at least, especially Dunn, for the foreseeable future, just to see what you have. We've talked about how to optimize him. Maybe Off-Ball as a secondary handler. Who knows what they do? But I think it's still too early to pull the plug on those guys.
Yeah, I agree with you. Really just kind of an interesting spot for the Bulls right now, because I feel like they should be just, like, taking chances on guys. And, if you have Cameron Payne on your roster now, like, I think we kind of know that what Cameron Payne is almost. Like, we can feel pretty good that he's not an NBA player. I would rather just be able to cycle through his roster spot and, like, take chances on guys. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. I think that's what they have to do. That's what they should be doing, at least. You have to try to find serviceable players. They don't have a ton of talent. So that's the one mechanism you can use, is try to get these guys into your building, see if they have NBA skills, and try to lock them up for a longer-term deal, maybe with non-guaranteed money. Then you create a player that's an asset to your cap sheet.
Let's move on. Let's talk about Rashad Vaughn. Rashad Vaughn has not been very good. I thought he was significantly overdrafted by Milwaukee when they selected him at, I believe, number 17 in the 2015 draft. He was a guy that I had, like, ranked in the 40s on my board. Vaughn was always a project, though. You know what I mean? Like, he was always a guy that was going to take a lot of time. He needed to get physically stronger. He needed to at least understand how to defend. They were going to have to teach him how to do all of this, and they were going to have to get his body into good shape. And I get it from he has not been very good perspective, and I get it from a salary cap perspective, because his money now is going to be able to go toward a minimum salary spot, and that's going to save them in luxury tax after Jabari Parker gets some money this offseason. I kind of like the idea of taking, like, a mini chance on him, like maybe as a camp guy next year, maybe even give him like a 1-year minimum guarantee if you're a bad team, to just kind of give him minutes and see what happens. But what are your thoughts here? Because I'm kind of mixed on it.
Yeah, I think, first of all, in the draft, he's a Schwartz guy. So apparently he was selected for political reasons to give the Bucks exclusive negotiating rights with Middleton. That's kind of the rumor going around, is that's why he was selected so high. That just gives you kind of a look into the dynamics of the draft. Sometimes is you do an agent a favor by selecting a guy high, and then you get exclusive negotiating rights with Middleton. I was with you. I had him in like the 40s or 50s. I didn't like him much as a prospect. He's just so inconsistent. He's had really good games. He's had good flashes, especially in Summer League. Like, he had one game in Summer League where he was legitimately great, and then the next game it looks like he wasn't even on the court. I think that kind of encompasses his contributions, and that's just tough to swallow on an NBA roster. If you're not consistent and you're kind of a fringe guy, that's like, compare him to Sterling Brown. If you're the Bucks, you'd probably rather have Sterling Brown's consistent energy, at least the threat of three-point shots, spotting up off ball, that frame defensively, than Rashad Vaughn, who you never know what you're getting from on a nightly basis. He's not probably good enough offensively, even on his best nights, to make like a huge difference. He can be okay. So I'm on the fence as far as giving him a contract next year. I would lean more towards a partial or maybe a non-guaranteed, but I wouldn't hate it.
Yeah, I mean, at $2.9 million next year, though, I think he's probably not someone you need to continue to pay. But it's worth mentioning he just turned 21. So, like, he is still incredibly, incredibly young. Like, he is probably very close in age to Bruce Brown right now, who we talked about last week as, like, a combo guard that will be selected in this year's NBA draft, who is a sophomore in college right now. So there's still some time for him, but time is running out. Like, he needs to show something this year in Milwaukee. And, you know, he's played 4 games. He's playing 11 minutes a game, knocking down some shots occasionally. He needs to just keep doing that. I think as long as he keeps kind of doing what he's shown so far from Milwaukee, there's a chance that a team will be like, okay, maybe we want to invest $400,000 worth of a guarantee in him next year.
Agreed, for sure. What did you think of the Josh Huestis decision? Again, that goes to the luxury tax. We've seen that trend a little bit with Oklahoma City, of course, being in the tax. Do you think that was purely the choice there were tax reasons, or do you think it's about the player as well?
I would bet that it probably is tax with Huestis. You know, like, I, again, wasn't like a huge fan of selecting him. I think I had him in like the 50s on draft night whenever he was selected. He was, of course, a 2014 NBA draft selection, I believe. Kind of a weird deal where he agreed to stash himself in the D League in Oklahoma City for a year and then sign a contract, which made him an interesting guy for Oklahoma City to take a flyer on. He's playing for Oklahoma City. Like, he's getting very real rotation minutes. I just never saw enough of an offensive game with him to really think that he could be anything resembling a two-way player. He's like kind of an undersized 4-man who, you know, I never really totally bought into the jump shot being a valuable weapon for him. So, yeah, I don't really have an issue with this necessarily. If I remember correctly, his salary next year is going to be like $2.2 million, so they can save like $800,000 in luxury tax, or $800,000 in roster payments plus whatever they're going to be owing in luxury tax. So that's not insignificant savings. So I get it. I don't really know that he's shown enough this year to really think that he's going to be worth that money.
I agree. I mean, if he could shoot a corner 3 consistently, of course, he'd be someone to consider, but his shot just seems like a far ways away. What'd you think about Brice Johnson? I feel bad. I totally forgot that he was so young in the league. I thought he was a 4th-year guy as far as options. 3rd year. What do you think about that decision?
I did not like that from the Clippers. I thought that was a really weird decision, to be honest. So basically what the Clippers have to be saying there is that we do not think this guy is an NBA player. And I don't really know that we have enough information to conclude that yet. And plus, he's at $1.5 million next season in terms of salary. This is not that big 4th-year jump that you get. So I would have definitely exercised the option. I thought he looked pretty good at Summer League. I think that in limited minutes so far this year, he's looked okay. He's trying to add the three-pointer to his game. If he ever does that, I think he's definitely going to be worth a roster spot. But he just hasn't quite gotten that range down yet. He's still more of a mid-range jump shooter, attack the glass, uber athlete in terms of explosiveness kind of guy. I would have exercised this option and continued to kind of see where this goes with his development. Because if you remember correctly, too, he missed all of last year with the back injury.
Yes. Yeah, I echo all that. I think that makes a lot of sense. In Summer League, he did play well, a lot from the post and those mid-post turnarounds and stuff like that. He's not going to be used that way in the NBA, so I agree. If he can add a three-point shot, he becomes somewhat interesting. But, I mean, I don't know. For the Clippers, I guess they're competing now. They're trying to use those roster spots for a minimum contract of a guy who could contribute this year. Maybe they release him. I don't know what they do. But it seems like at least next year they're trying to actually compete, and they don't feel like he's worth that salary. I don't know. I mean, can you really foresee him playing a role in the Clippers moving forward? Looking at their rotation, maybe. So I could go either way on this. I was never a huge fan of Brice Johnson in the draft. I think I had him like outside the top 35, 40 or something like that. But again, he's another fringe guy, not expensive. That I think it might be a little premature.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Doc Rivers. Whenever he was general manager, man, they hit Reggie Bullock, CJ Wilcox, and Brice Johnson as a trifecta, man.
Jesus.
that is just beautiful. I'm trying to think, are there any other interesting ones to you? Like, was the Justin Anderson exercise contract interesting at all, just because Philly can have so much cap space next year and he's going to get a little bit of a bump? I don't know. That one struck me as strange in a way, even though I'm relatively in on Justin Anderson.
Yeah, again, I think that might be political with the Nerlens trade and just having something to show for it, because I think a lot of people were already up in arms about dealing Nerlens for what they got back. If you just declined his option, that looks pretty bad as a general manager. It depends on who you get, of course, in free agency. If it helps you facilitate, let's say they get Avery Bradley somehow, and he's a great fit in their roster, like that would make that look better. But that, again, it's hard to forecast the future. So I understood it. I mean, I'm not a huge Anderson guy, but he has shot the three decently well this year, and he's given them good minutes.
Yeah. I mean, he's a tough one to evaluate until his defense becomes better, or if his defense becomes better, because he really does just kind of get lost out there defensively a lot of the time in a way that is pretty surprising from a guy who went to Virginia and should have those like kind of strong defensive principles kind of ingrained in him. Like Joe Harris is a guy who at least knows where to be defensively. We obviously know about Malcolm Brogdon. Akil Mitchell and Darian Atkins have kind of stuck around even the fringes of NBA rosters and training camps just because of knowing where to be defensively. And Anderson hasn't really gotten there yet, and it makes me wonder if he ever will. But if he does get there, I think he's a valuable NBA piece. Let's finish on Kevon Looney. Kevon Looney is purely like a salary cap situation. He was going to make right around like $700,000 more than the minimum, which is going to cost Golden State something like $3.5 million extra or $4 million extra just due to their luxury tax payments. Are we surprised, especially after he kind of had the best NBA game of his career the day before his option was declined? Or like, do we think there's anything interesting about Kevon Looney?
I think that's it's basically fiscal, and the fact that Jordan Bell's just a better player than he is, and he's going to have a rotation spot over him. I do think that he may be a rosterable NBA player. We just don't know enough information about him yet, I'd say. He does have flashes. He has the length. I think he's probably a backup five. His one skill coming into the draft was offensive rebounding in conjunction with that length. I think he's probably going to find a landing spot on a team, but I don't really blame the Warriors. I mean, their luxury tax situation, their fiscal situation is obviously very original for them, so I don't mind it.
Yeah, I think it's a fine decision. I would be interested to see a team take a chance on him, though. I think that, like you said, backup five who can kill the offensive glass, finish around the rim, maybe stretch it out a little bit and shoot from three. Yep. That has some value to me, at least. But let's go ahead and move into the second part of our podcast. But first, here is a note from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Greats, maker of the all-time greats, classic, stylish, and comfortable sneakers sold at a great price. Greats is Brooklyn's first sneaker company. They sell all the greats, classic styles, made the best for less. They have a wide selection of men's and women's shoes, versatile styles suitable for any occasion, and tons of different colors and materials to choose from. Their best sellers include the all-leather Royale lace-up and Worcester slip-on. These white greats that I have been using them regularly. They are so valuable to my wardrobe because they're just a little bit classier than the KDs and the Jordans that I typically wear. You can check these out as well as lots of other great styles at greats.com. And we have got a special deal for you. Save 15% on your first order with our promo code GAMETHEORY. That's GAMETHEORY. Go to greats.com. That's GREATS.com. And be sure to enter Game Theory to save 15% at checkout. Greats also believes so much in their shoes. They offer a no-risk return and exchange policy to guarantee that you get the right fit in a style that you love. That's greats.com and use our code Game Theory to save 15%. Thanks to Greats for sponsoring the podcast. Let's talk about some NBA draft wings. Cole, what is your overall kind of initial impression on this wing class?
I like it in conjunction with the combo forward class. I think there's a lot of really interesting potential two-way players. This might be, along with the bigs are the strength of the class, I think, but this might be second to that as far as those two-way potential guys. If we have enough information about shooting, defensive awareness, off ball, I think it's a deep class. I mean, we get the benefit of having some returning guys like Bridges from Villanova that will add to the depth. I'm really high on him personally. So
you do really like him.
I do. I'm a pretty big fan of him. So from my initial takes, it's hard to analyze defense, especially in the AAU circuit. So we need information that's more akin to the NBA. So that'll be really interesting to watch.
Yeah. So my kind of first impressions here are that the thing that stands out most, first and foremost, I would say, is athleticism. You look at the guys at the top of this class. You've got Lonnie Walker. You've got Hamidou Diallo. You've got, Chris Wilkes we're going to talk about today. All these guys are very, very athletic. And then you could even, once you get into the, combo forwards, you can talk about Miles Bridges. You can talk about, Michael Porter Jr. There are a lot of guys that really stand out athletically to me. Now, I think that where you kind of give some of that back is in terms of definite shooting consistency. Like, Hamidou Diallo is not there as a shooter. Sorry. Troy Brown is not quite there as a shooter yet. I worry a little bit about Mikal Bridges shooting on the move. I know his percentages are wild high and he's super efficient, but a lot of it's spot up stuff. And I'm starting to worry a little bit more about the way that translates to the NBA. Chris Wilkes, not really a great shooter yet. Rawle Alkins, I think we still have to kind of have the jury out on him. Just a lot of these guys, we have to learn more about their shooting ability before we can feel comfortable kind of discussing where they're at.
I like what you said about shooting on the move. I like shot diversity in prospects if you can have it. I mean, shooting off a pin down is a lot rarer than you'd think it is. I think that a guy like Mikal Bridges, you're exactly right, spot-up shooter, probably a corner three-point shooter. That's where you feel the best about placing him. You're not going to run him off a pin down. He's not going to shoot off the bounce. So, yeah, I mean, they really have to knock down shots with time and space, off the catch to be something. I think that's the easiest thing to learn, like the rhythm tendencies. We've seen even in the NBA, someone like Aaron Gordon over the course of 3 or 4 years in the NBA really refined his off-the-catch shooting. He's got that, he hops into it now, good rhythm tendency. So that's it. That has to be there. But at the same time, you can't really project shooting just based on spot ups, in my opinion, with any kind of like real confidence. I mean, it's good if somebody shoots 42% from on catch and shoot threes, but if it's not off shot diversity, if you're not coming off flare actions or any kind of movement, it's hard to project high level shooting.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Let's kind of start with Lonnie Walker. Have you gotten a chance to watch a ton of Lonnie Walker yet? I know that the last time we spoke, you were not necessarily quite there yet in terms of your evaluation.
I've watched about as much as I can find on him. I've mostly only seen the All-Star Circuit events, watched a little bit of his high school tape, so I'm going to rely on you mostly here, but I have some takes on him.
So I'm a huge fan of what he brings to the table in a theoretical sense right now. First and foremost, he has great dimensions in terms of his frame. He's 6'4", 6'10" wingspan, can handle the ball a little bit. Really is a good shooter when he gets it going. I would guess he'll probably be right around that 38 to 40% range this year, unless he starts taking some kind of shitty shots, which, occasionally happens with him. But, another thing that stands out is the athleticism. He is a guy that has a quick first step. Like I said, can handle the ball in a good manner, attacking closeouts, good explosiveness in terms of attacking the rim. And I'm a little bit worried about him shooting off screens because he just hasn't done it yet. We'll see how that works. I am a little bit interested to see him in a manner where he actually has to defend. He has great dimensions for it. He has really good athleticism to defend. I don't know that he has shown the propensity to defend yet, though. He needs to also show a little bit more in terms of decision-making for me. He needs to attack a closeout, take 2 dribbles, see that the layup isn't there, kick it out to the wing for an open 3. He needs to, decide not to take that shitty pull-up 3 that he'll sometimes take. Overall, though, in a game where the 2-guard position is so often, guys catching kickouts and being able to attack closeouts and doing it in a very coherent manner, I really like what Lonnie Walker has shown me so far at the AAU level. What have been your initial impressions of him?
I like his craft and body control around the basket, in addition to what you've already talked about. He's a pretty dynamic athlete. I don't think he's like top-notch explosive, but he does show good craft, creativity, which you like to see. The quick first step, like you noted, is definitely evident on tape.
Yeah, he's like there's Hamidou Diallo, like in terms of like the elite athletes. He's like in that next tier down.
Exactly. Yeah, so you see some slashing potential. I don't know about his handle yet. I haven't seen enough to really project. Can he run a pick and roll? Is he more just a catch and go guy as far as on closeouts? The feel level, how good of a passer is he? Defensive motor, and how good the handle is were the three big questions for me.
Yeah, so I'll kind of add just a little bit to round this out before we move on. So I talked to Jim Larinaga to do the Miami preview I did at The Athletic, and he mentioned to me that Lonnie is probably the most mature freshman he's ever had in his coaching career. Like, he's the kind of guy who will go up to his professors after a lecture and shake their hand and say, thank you for doing this lecture and thank you for teaching me today. Very, very nice kid, apparently a very humble kid. He also is coming back from a torn meniscus this summer. He's just starting to get back to 100% in terms of his on-court activity. So we'll see if he's a little bit of a slow starter this year, but just some of the background on Lonnie Walker that could at least like play a role in how he starts this year and then how he develops going forward, because maturity and emotional maturity is one of the better ways that you can kind of project development within a player.
Yeah, if you combine his skills that are evident watching him with that kind of blue chip work ethic and character, that's going to really resonate with NBA executives. It might not for guys who just casually write about the drafts or whatnot, but that matters to the NBA. So I would expect if he shows what we think he's capable of, that he's going to go high.
All right, so let's move on. Let's talk about Hamidou Diallo. He is next on my list here. Diallo is a freak. He is 6'5", 7-foot wingspan, 200 pounds, 44.5-inch vertical leap last year at the Combine. I think that's the Combine, like the true Combine record, because I don't really count the Pat Connaughton one, where Connaughton, I think, kind of gamed the system by putting his arms lower on the standing reach test. So I think that Diallo is the record holder in terms of explosiveness, and that shows the first time that you see this dude on the basketball floor. I remember seeing him, I think, in the summer of 2014 or 2015, and the first time I saw him, my eyes like leapt out of my head. I was like, who the hell is that guy that just like put his entire head over the rim? He is unbelievable in terms of leaping, length. He is a quick first step, not necessarily the best ball handler yet, though, or at least he wasn't whenever he got to Kentucky, and that kind of hindered him in terms of his half-court offense. Also, not an awesome shooter yet. What have your impressions of Diallo been early on?
I've seen him twice in person, and he's a freak. I mean, he gets downhill in transition, and he can really rise up. He's more of a run and jump athlete right now than an overall functional athlete in his game, I think. I mean, he's still got a great first step, like you noted, but the skill level is way behind the athleticism and the IQ. The skill level is way behind the IQ, or way behind the athleticism right now. As far as for me, what I've seen him play defensively, I like when he's engaged. I really like him. He has that quickness to be a point of attack defender. When he actually engages himself, I've seen a lot of FIBA tape where he's not really engaged and he kind of just drifts a little bit. So that's something I think that has to be an area of his game where he has to apply his athleticism, is that on-ball defense. I think that is the one area where he can really separate himself, because he has that ultra quickness. As far as the handle, again, I don't see a lot of shake with him. He's got a high and loose dribble. I don't really know what his avenues are to score in the half court in the NBA if he doesn't shoot and open up that attacking closeouts game, because he can really get to the basket quickly and explode. That's really interesting. The feel is really questionable. Not an experienced decision maker. He's made strides as a shooter from what I've seen. I've watched his tape. I don't think he's there yet by any means, but he gets better alignment now. The mechanics don't look repeatable yet, though. So that's still a work in progress. If he shoots well from Kentucky and it passes the eye test on film, if he does anything off screens, which I'm not expecting, I think he's more of a spot-up guy right now. That's something to look at. But, I mean, he's kind of like he's a high-level functional athlete if he plays on-ball defense, and that's what I like about him.
So where are you kind of at with him entering the season? Because he's a really tough one for me to kind of slot into my early board, because all of the tools are there for him to be a really good player. You just kind of need to really buy into him developing his skill set. And I know that you tend to be more of a skill over athleticism guy, whereas, I kind of go both ways on it, but I think that the more I watch, the more I do think that you need a very functional level of athleticism to play in the NBA. Like, where are you kind of at on him entering the year? Do you have him like lottery range, or are you lower on him?
I have him just outside the lottery. I think I have him top 20, but not in that lottery yet. I'm a little more skeptical right now. If he shows it defensively, and if he's like an aware off-ball defender in the passing lanes, if he's dynamic on ball, consistent energy and effort, and he's really exerting himself on that end, I'll probably move him up a little bit, because then I think that's where the functional athleticism comes into play. But I can't really be that high on his offense right now. There's just no really mechanism for him to score in the NBA half court. But he is. I do like him more than guys that don't have any feel for the game, that just go out there and run and jump athletes. Like, I think that he can be more than that.
So we're going to get to a guy next who I know that you're a big fan of, in Troy Brown. Troy Brown, 6'7". I think he has right around a 6'11" wingspan, 210 pounds. Not a crazy athlete. He is one of the youngest players in his class. I think he just turned 18 recently. He'll be 18 on draft night as well next year. Troy Brown is a really tricky one because of the athleticism, but he has incredible skills. He can handle the basketball at his size. Really, really good passer, to the point where I think Oregon at times this year is going to let him just kind of run point. Really has that kind of skill set. And it's going to fit really, really well with what Dana Altman wants to do, and the way that Altman plays that kind of 4-out, 5-out offense where everyone really needs to be able to handle the ball. That's where his offenses have been most successful in the past. Where are you kind of at on Troy Brown? I would venture that you're a little bit higher on him than I am.
Yeah, I really like him. I mean, I've seen him a couple times in person. He always stands out at these all-star events for just playing the right way. He's got great feel. He was a high school point guard. I watched a lot of his high school games when he played like Marvin Bagley, and he was the best player on the floor in those games. Like, that's crazy to say. I mean, he's not the same level of prospect, but he's a really good player. I like that combination with the size, frame, length, fluid athleticism. You add his IQ and his skill level, and it's really interesting if he can shoot the ball. I think that's where we come down to with him, is he's ironed out his mechanics a lot. I mean, he used to have a hitch, I think, three years ago. He doesn't have that anymore. I'm not sure how dynamic he is off the dribble. I think he's okay. Off the catch, I think he can get there. From what I've seen him, he's not statistically great as a shooter yet, but he does show signs of good mechanics. So that's really what it comes down to with him. I think he reminds me kind of like a Chris Middleton type player, but maybe a little bit better of a ball handler and passer. I don't know. It depends on the shooting. I think that he does have defensive appeal. I have seen some Evan Turner comparisons. I'm not sure if people are getting at that with a negative connotation or a positive. You can see some of the feel similarities. I do think that Brown's a better defensive player. I think he's quicker, and he's got a pretty good motor on that end. So I feel good about him as kind of a two-way player. But again, the biggest thing for him is going to be shooting.
Yeah, I like the Evan Turner comparison a little bit, to be honest. I think that if you are going to compare him to someone, I think that's probably about right. And Evan Turner just got a 4-year, $72 million contract last offseason. So if that's what you're going off of, where Evan Turner has made $100 million in his career, I think that Troy Brown is a potentially very valuable player. I think that if the shooting ever comes around in the slightest, like if he can be like a 34 to 36% three-point shooter, I think he's a very valuable player in the NBA, because I do think that just given his mentality, given the fact that he is known as one of the better kids in terms of maturity for his age in this class, I think that kind of stuff points to him developing as a defender, to where as long as the shot comes around, he is going to be a valuable piece. So where are you kind of slotting Brown in early on for you?
I have him right around top 10. He's like in that consideration for me. I'm really, really high on him as far as filling a role in the NBA. But it would be nice to have that that shooting information. I mean, because he's not very explosive around the rim, especially off 1 foot in traffic. He doesn't have, I don't think, primary creator equity really at all, just because I'm not sure what his first step is in his shake with the ball. He just seems kind of like a secondary handler type. I think he can play in pick and roll, make reads there, but I think he definitely checks out more as like an NBA, high-level NBA role player. I don't know if he has any star equity, so that's kind of how I view him.
Yeah, I think that that's a great way to put it, but then again, like you kind of mentioned Chris Middleton before, right? Like Chris Middleton does have star equity in the NBA now. Like he is probably a top 50 player in the NBA. Like that skill set is potentially valuable if the jump shot is there.
Yeah, I think it depends on how you define star. I would define Chris Middleton as a star level role player. I think he's awesome on a on a team. But you see the Bucks even this year. Can he be a number 2 guy on a title team? I don't think so. I think that the Bucks are running into problems because Giannis doesn't have enough help. I think he's ideally casted as like a number 3 or number 4 and like on a really good team, and that's kind of how I view Brown. But that goes down to how you define stars, and that gets pretty dicey as far as universally accepted.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a mechanic to do, like a mechanical way to do it now. I don't know. I didn't put this guy on your initial list, but I feel like I kind of have to. Dzanan Musa out of Bosnia is a very interesting player to me right now. He has been really, really good to open the year. He's been on NBA radars, I would say, for 2 to 3 years at this stage. Always been one of the best scorers in his class. He is aggressive. He is a shot creator who can get it. You give him the ball on the wing, he can create with crossovers. He can create with a quick step back. He can get to the rim. He's a really, really excellent scorer in Europe. I think there are a lot of questions in terms of how the rest of his game kind of will work out at the next level. Can he actually be a wing at the next level? He's like 6'8", 6'9", with the like 6'9" wingspan, something like that. Has a really goofy frame to where he plays shorter than he actually is too. Like he kind of hunches a lot and doesn't really ever pass the ball from what I've seen. How much of him have you seen?
I've seen a little bit. He's next on my agenda of guys to get to. Watching him play the Tennessee kid, that's my next operation here. I worry about Musa a little bit just from a defensive standpoint. And again, the athleticism, like you said, it's hard to, when you're a self-creator and you don't have that kind of athleticism, and it stands out in Europe, but translating that to the NBA game, if that's your main skill, it's hard to really get totally on board with that. He is skilled. He can get to his pull-ups. What do you know about his attitude? Like, he just strikes me as he's kind of irritating on the court to me, like his personality. I don't know if I caught the wrong game or something, but he just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Is that an accurate representation of him?
Yeah, maturity for NBA folks has always been a major, major question for him. Like, He has some of the worst body language I have seen on a basketball floor from time to time. Like, he will really, really just I don't know if it necessarily kills his confidence because he's still willing to go out there and try and get his jump shot and kind of do his thing, but like he'll sulk, he'll do that thing where he hunches even though he's just generally hunched as a player overall. He's a tough one, man. Like, maturity is something that has been brought up to me from NBA folks, put it that way. So far this year, I just kind of want to give numbers on what he's doing. He's averaging over 20 points per 40 minutes for Sedativa over in the Adriatic League. 59 true shooting percentage right now in 13 games. So we're not talking about like a hyper small sample size, 300 minutes, and you can do some goofy stuff in 300 minutes, but it's not like the smallest sample size in the world either. This comes after last season. I think he was right around like a 55 true shooting percentage. So like it's starting to, it seems like, move up and continue to improve. Overall, I'm not like the biggest fan of his game. Like, he'll be in my top 30 whenever I release my big board, but he's not going to be much higher than that.
Yeah, I can really echo all that. From what I've seen, I'm not super interested, but it just comes down to how many guys that I like. He's probably going to be right after that.
Yeah, so where are you at on Rodion Kurucs, too? Because I think that, he was a guy that was expected to enter the draft last year. I think he probably would have been stashed later on in the first round if he would have declared. I do think that there was some question about that for NBA teams and for his representation, which is why he decided not to enter. But what is kind of your feel on him? Another kind of 6'8" guy that probably fits best as a small forward in today's NBA, just given his skill set.
Yeah, I've caught some tape of him last year. I liked his slashing athleticism. It kind of stood out to me, at least in that setting. He got to the basket, and he was able to finish relatively well. I don't know what his stats are there. But if he can shoot the ball, he has the frame. He competes on defense, from what I've seen, relatively consistently. So, yeah, that combo 40 kind of role where maybe you're not you're tasking him with a lot of creation. He's more of just a space guy who can switch a little bit. I think that's kind of the archetype I would put him into.
Yeah, so I guess I will have him in my top 30, but like he's also like not playing right now, really. Like I believe that John Gavoni at Draft Express /ESPN now recently reported that like Barcelona refuses to dress him for the EuroLeague or ACB, possibly due to his refusal to accept a contract extension. So like there's some of that politics going on. If you remember, Mario Hezonja also kind of had to deal with some politics over there as well with Barcelona, where, you know, he decided he wanted to enter the NBA draft, and, you know, the NBA teams were going over there to see him and they wouldn't always showcase him. I don't know overall what to really gauge with Kurucs beyond that. As you kind of mentioned, I think that your read on him is right on in terms of a guy that maybe you can play him as like a small ball 4, but really he's probably a 3, kind of a fluid athlete guy who can, handle the ball a little bit. Shooting needs to come around, though. I think for him to be an NBA player, the shooting has to improve.
Definitely. Yeah, 100%.
So let's talk about some college guys, because I think that's really all I want to talk about from international perspective. I do reserve the right to change that, but I think that that's about all we got from the international guys. A guy that I am really high on and am a little bit higher on than Mikal Bridges is Tyus Battle. I really like Tyus Battle's ability to create offensively. I like the fact that he really, really improved as a jump shooter last year. He was a guy that, coming into college, that was a relatively big question. I know that in his high school career, like as a sophomore and junior, he really didn't shoot at all. And then as a senior, it kind of came around. And then last year, he hit like 36% of his threes. If he can hit like 38% of his threes this year, being the focal point of their offense, as well as bringing the defensive intensity that he's kind of always brought. Like he has really long arms. I think he's like right around like a 6'10 wingspan, 6'9 wingspan. At 6'5", 6'6", somewhere in that range. He is really, really good feet, and he gives a shit on that end. I like the idea of him as a potential first-round pick that a lot of people I don't know are really talking about right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched him a lot yesterday, just kind of get caught up. Solid build, wide shoulders, above average athlete in space. I really like the toughness and the physicality, like you noted. He absorbs contact pretty well at the rim, has a pull-up game. He seems comfortable shooting off the dribble, gets good elevation, and that defensive reputation you were alluding to definitely stands out as far as his physicality. My concerns with him is that he rarely got to the rim, just statistically looking at it. He isn't overly explosive in traffic. He's pretty good, not great. I'm not sure about his shot. That's where it comes down for me. He has a slight hitch, and there's a lot of moving parts. Like, he'll kick his leg out at times. It just never seems really that consistent. I know statistically he shot well last year, but I'm a little bit more reserved on his shot right now. I don't know that much about his handle. Is he more than just a straight line guy? Can he run pick and roll? How is his passing? Those are the elements I haven't seen enough of yet.
He's definitely more straight line right now than a guy who's going to like wiggle and be able to kind of do a lot of different stuff. I will definitely readily admit that, which is certainly very scary as far as being able to create in the NBA. But I do think his role is more going to lie on the defensive end. I think he can be a really, really high-level defender. Worth noting in terms of the rest of his floor game, not really much of a passer from what I've seen yet. Statistically, I'm looking it up right now, 10.5 assist rate, not great last year. Not much of a rebounder either. I solely believe that it comes down to him being a 3-and-D guy. Can he be a person who knocks down 37% of his threes, and can he be a really, really good defender with a big frame, good strength, good length, who can lock up other guys and be switchable? I think if he can do that, he's an NBA player. Other than that, we'll see. And I like the fact that in a straight line, he can handle the ball.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
So let's move on to a couple of other guys here. Mikal Bridges, we need to talk about him. He is your guy. I'm going to let you just have the floor for Mikal Bridges.
I mean, you just start with the outstanding size, length, athleticism package for a wing. He's got a good frame. I don't think he's as functionally strong maybe as some people do. I'm not sure how much switchability, if he can defend fours consistently. I think he does have the measurables and the athleticism. It just comes down to the functional body strength. He knows who he is as a player. A lot of that is just being formed next to guys like Josh Hart. He plays within himself. ultra efficient slasher and finisher. That's, I think, the most underrated part of his game. He's got really great touch around the rim. He's always been a high-level finisher. He's got enough handle to attack just in straight lines or on closeouts. His shot mechanics are a little rigid, and like we discussed before, they're pretty. He doesn't have the shot diversity. It's basically all off the catch. He doesn't have a pull-up game, but he shows flashes as a passer. He'll make the extra pass, move the ball. Quick and long defensively, often plays at the point of attack for Villanova. He's their best defensive player by far. It just comes down to really, like, this year he's going to get a little bit more chances, we think, to create his own shot. He's been a deer in the headlights in those settings. There's a lot of games where he'll catch the ball like low in the shot clock and he has no idea what to do with it. So he really needs to shoot the ball to be an effective NBA player. But I think he does have some ancillary skills. If he can make a corner NBA three, maybe he gets to hit above the break threes in time. I like his role player potential in the NBA a lot. It's just a lot is riding on that shot.
Yeah, so you mentioned the defensive versatility. I would think that eventually he'll probably be able to guard some fours. We'll see. Maybe he just never fully grows into his frame enough to where that's an actual possibility. I think he's like right around 215 pounds right now. Maybe he can put on like 10 more. If he puts on 10 more, he's probably big enough to bang with those guys. What it comes down to for me is that you kind of mentioned the athleticism, and I think he applies his athleticism really, really well to the defensive end of the floor. His length really plays up there. He's very, very switchable in the college game. He's good at going out and hedging. He is able to recover to his man with ease. The length causes all sorts of problems defensively. I don't think his athleticism plays up at all offensively right now. I don't know if it's a confidence thing. I don't know if he just can't really handle the ball enough to where he feels comfortable putting on the deck. But everything he does looks so robotic offensively. Even the jump shot you mentioned being rigid. It's just very robotic offensively in a way that kind of scares me going forward in terms of the NBA, because teams can take away what you do best in the NBA. Like, you really have to have a secondary threat. Like, unless you're a guy like Klay Thompson, who Thompson can at least handle the basketball. He can attack closeouts or, sidestep, closeout guy who can then take a three-pointer, go into his right. But with Bridges, I haven't seen any of that yet. And you kind of mentioned the ability to at least make the right pass. I agree with that in terms of making the right pass. I just don't think he's really a playmaker either,
Oh, absolutely. And I think that you brought up a great point with the confidence. That's one thing I'm really concerned with, just projecting these guys. He just doesn't have that natural aggressiveness, especially offensively. Like, he seems like a really timid player. NBA coach is going to trust to put him on the floor. He'll actually take advantage. He seems like a record scratch kind of guy. You know what I mean? Like, does he have enough confidence to get on the NBA floor early in his career and actually defend, take shots that are open? That's just something to keep in mind. But I do think that he has a lot of skills that fit in the modern game really well.
I agree with you. He does have a lot of skills that fit really well. I just wonder if the sum of the package is less than those skills. You know what I mean?
It's definitely possible.
Let's go on ahead and move on. We've got Jacob Evans here next on my list. I'm a big Jacob Evans guy. How much Jacob Evans have you seen?
A lot. I'm a huge fan as well.
So I like Jacob Evans more than I like Mikal Bridges. Are you anywhere near that with me?
I'm not that. I mean, I think probably maybe 10 to 12 spots would differ in if I did a big board today, that would be the range about that. Maybe I can't say precisely, but I definitely have Bridges about 10 spots higher.
So yeah, Jacob Evans is 6'6". That's reasonable length, not like super, super long, but he is tough as hell defensively. He knocks down threes. He's a 42% three-point shooter last year on a strong number of attempts. He can really handle the basketball. He plays point guard occasionally for Cincinnati. Can really, really pass it as well. 16% assist rate, but a lot of Cincinnati's assist rates tend not to be super, super high just because of how much those guys share the ball around in general. 60% true shooting rate. Not like a crazy athlete, but he's a very functional, fluid athlete who I think really understands the game in a strong manner.
100%. And like the shooting mechanics really stand out to me. They're a little low. This release is a little low, and the arc can be a bit flat at times, but simple, really simple one motion release. He looks comfortable from NBA range, and he has shot diversity. I watched a lot of his tape yesterday as well. Spot ups, pull ups, off screen flashes, usually just flare types. He's not coming off pin downs or anything, but he can set his feet quickly, and he has good footwork. So I really like that Cincinnati defensive culture. That's just one of my kind of Michigan State likings in college basketball. I like that, like how that cultivates these guys. size. And if he has enough handle to maybe attack a closeout, he's not super explosive, but he can play above the rim in space. He's a really nice 3-and-D prospect that I don't think a lot of national sites and people are talking about.
Let's move on and talk about Allonzo Trier. I feel like Allonzo Trier is a guy you're either in on or you're not in on. Are you in on Allonzo Trier at all?
I'm curious, but I would definitely lean towards being skeptical.
Yeah, I don't really blame people that are skeptical. I don't think he's going to defend anyone at the next level. Like he actually has gotten a lot better at that, playing under Sean Miller. Like his first year, he was a disaster. When he played last year, he at least got into the right positions and was solid. But what it comes down to is the shooting, right? Like if you believe he is a 39 to 40% 3-point shooter, or can be that, I think that you're probably a pretty big fan of him, especially given all of the different shot creation abilities he has. This guy is a professional scorer, full stop. And the thing that I like that he's added to his game, he did it a little bit last year, just talking to him at Pac-12 Media Day real quick. Something that he mentioned to me that he's going to be doing more of this year is playing some backup point guard minutes. If he can play some backup point guard minutes at 6'5", with, I think he has like a 6'7" wingspan, and you can hide him, 1 through 3 on the worst offensive player defensively. I kind of like the idea of him just because he gets to the foul line. He has a creative mindset in the way he tries to attack scoring the basketball, and the passing is coming around. I also believe he doesn't really ever turn the ball over too. Like that's one of those random underrated skills that I like. He never really turns the ball over. Now you can say sometimes he turns it over with shitty shot selection, but when you're shooting 61 true shooting percentage throughout 2 years, I'm kind of willing to live with some of the bad shots. You know what I mean?
For sure. And I think that it just comes down to, at a certain point in the draft, you have to just take guys that have an NBA caliber skill set. And I think that he does. He's ultra efficient as a scorer. You see some deception with his ball handling, using crossovers. He can shoot off the catch, off the dribble.
Really good change of pace, too.
Yes. Yeah, can operate in pick and roll. He's not an explosive finisher, but he has pretty good body control there on up and unders that I've noticed. But yeah, the defense is tough. If he plays backup point guard, that is not something I had considered before. I did not know that was an option. So if he does that, then I would be a little higher on him just because you can see the scoring fluidity, and he is efficient. So you have to give him credit for that.
On his team as well as Rawle Alkins, kind of 6'5", very long, tough New York guard, kind of like, I'd say he's more of like a shooting guard than anything else. Do you have any strong impressions of him?
I mean, the lazy comp, of course, is Lance Stevenson. I mean, everybody makes that just from the connections there. I mean, the frame is spectacular. When he can get downhill, good body control, has the strength to absorb contact, can play a little bit in pick and roll, has some feel. I don't think he's a high-level thinker, but he's okay. Workable mechanics from 3. Obviously, the shooting is going to really be huge for him. His issues is his feel level. Again, he lacks a dynamic first step or really shake with the ball. And he's not super explosive. I think a lot of the times he relies on his body to create separation, and I'm not sure that's going to exist at the next level, but at a certain point in the draft, I think I'll consider him. Yeah,
the key for me is the jump shot with him. If he is like a 37% 3-point shooter or 39 or whatever he shot last year, I think maybe he can be an NBA player. He's tough-nosed defensively. He does have the frame to get after it on that end at least. If he can be like kind of a 3-and-D who can get downhill and attack a little bit, that interests me a little bit at least. He was a guy that pulled out late from the NBA draft process last year. I think he probably would have gone within the first 10 picks of the second round had he decided to stay in. Interesting guy, at least to me. Like, I think he probably will get drafted one day, put it that way.
I agree with that.
Just a couple of, random smaller school guys. John Conchar is a guy that's gotten some publicity recently. I want to say that either Mike or John over at ESPN Draft Express wrote him up. A guy that NBA scouts have also mentioned to me as well. He's 21 years old. I think he'll be a junior this year at IPFW, so Indiana, Purdue, Fort Wayne. He's a guy that has never really interested me. Super low usage, super high efficiency in terms of a jump shooter, has some defensive versatility due to his size, but I'm just not sure I see the appeal. Have you watched any of him yet?
I have not, no.
Justin James at Wyoming was something of a like mini breakout guy last year. He averaged 16 points, 5 rebounds per game, knocked down 42% of his threes, 6'7" guy. Interesting potential wing. He's a guy I'm going to be watching at the very least. Have you watched any of Justin James by chance?
I have not.
Justin James is a guy to watch. Okay. Not like, some of these guys are like borderline, you know what I mean? Matisse Thybulle's in your neck of the woods at Washington. I'm sure that you've run across him just watching Markelle Fultz and watching some of the guys that have come across that scheme over the last 3 years. 6'5", 7-foot wingspan, 40% 3-point shooter last year, gets a ton of steals. I don't think he's quite as good defensively as his reputation is from time to time, but I think he has a high ceiling there if he can continue to kind of lock in on that end and be more consistent.
Yeah, and I just don't really trust UW's defensive philosophy. I don't think they develop players on that side of the ball well. We've seen that with Marquise Chris, for example.
New philosophy, man.
The tendencies are just... there's a lot of 2-3 zone. I know that he generates events. He gets in the passing lanes. I think he had one game last year where he had a ton of blocks that I was at. I actually went to that game. So he does have the length. He can shoot pretty well. I think he's kind of a streak shooter. I'm not sure if I'm buying him completely on that end, but I can see why guys are intrigued. I think Kevin Pelton was kind of on board with him at one point. I'm not sure if he still is.
Pelton's on board with all the UW guys.
Yeah, seriously.
Jeff Carroll at Oklahoma State is a guy who knocked down a bunch of threes playing with Jawan Evans last year. I think he was a little bit more of a product of Evans than the other way around. Have you seen any of Jeff Carroll, really?
I watched him yesterday. I did like the shooting mechanics. Pretty fluid. The only problem with me is he had a huge, like he had a huge shooting spike last year, and those are usually red flags for me.
Yeah, I mean, 100% right. It was a definite spike. I think he was like a 34% guy as a sophomore at Oklahoma State. Last year, it was like at 45% or something ridiculous. I do think that the shooting is relatively real. I just don't know that anything else beyond the shooting and athleticism is real.
Yeah, I'm with that.
You mentioned Josh Okogie as a guy that you want to talk about. For those who don't know, 6'4", 7-foot wingspan, kind of a bigger frame out of Georgia Tech, kind of an underrated freshman last year who has caught the eye of some NBA scouts for sure.
Yeah, he's got a great frame, like you noted. He's got like a +8 or 9 wingspan, 7-foot wingspan. You just rarely see that combination. He's solidly built, 6'4" guy. He's got clean mechanics. They're not ideal. It's more of a set shot, lower release, a bit slow. But he can make open threes. He did that last year pretty consistently. Gets good alignment, and he has enough strength. I think eventually he doesn't have to have that big ball dip. He can just go straight up, and has the tools and the agility to be a plus defender when he's engaged. He just doesn't shoot the ball well when contested. He lacks explosiveness around the rim, and he's more straight line guy. He's another guy that I'm not sure about his feel level yet. I got to go back and watch more of him, but he's another guy that could be like a 3-and-D type player.
Kostya Machidi ended up pulling out of the draft last year. He's been on NBA draft, radars for I think 2 to 3 years now as well. 6'5", super long arms, right around a 7-foot wingspan. Kind of has like a really thick upper body frame. Almost looks like a little bit top heavy, to be honest.
Yeah.
I'm relative. I think he's a fine stash in the second round, just as I thought he would have been last year, but. There are a lot of questions he needs to answer, and he still has not played yet this year for Mega.
Yeah, I saw him at Hoop Summit, and he wasn't great over the course of the week, and then he had a big he had 2 big events when the NBA execs showed up. He started making shots, and that's basically the thing with him. He hasn't shot that well internationally, and he just doesn't have any ball skills that translate, even in a Hoop Summit setting. Like, he couldn't really do anything off the dribble. He does compete defensively. He has that, bull chest. He has great length. So if he can shoot, he might be something. I agree with you. I think he's more of a second-round stash. You
also mentioned Gary Trent here. Do you want to talk real quick about Gary Trent?
Sure. I mean, I'm not a huge Gary Trent guy, but I know a lot of sites have him like top 20-ish. He has a developed frame, although like watching highlights from Duke, it seems like he kind of slimmed down a little bit, but he does look like a 30-year-old. I mean, in Hoop Summit, he looked a lot older. Microwave scorer, he's got a good stroke, can really light it up when he has it going. I think he probably has shot diversity in his game. what my concern is everything else. Like, he just completely disappears when he's not scoring. Yeah. I don't know about his first step, his defense, his passing. He just kind of seems like that quintessential off the bench guy who when he has it going, he can generate points. If he's not, he really doesn't add any value to your team.
Yeah, I have some pretty significant worries about the athleticism. Is he going to be able to get separation enough at the next level? Brandon Randolph is a guy that I have no such worries about athletically. At Arizona, 6'6", microwave scorer to the T, right? Like, he is a streaky shooter who, when he gets it going, he's going to drop multiple 20-point games this year. I have no doubt about that. Really, really good athlete. If you saw some of the dunks from their, Arizona event that they do, like Midnight Madness or whatever, really, really good athlete as well. He's got to watch. He's also already 20, so he's very old for a freshman, but I think he really could play a pretty impact role this year. Brian Bowen, we're not really going to get a chance to see a ton of him this year probably, because I would imagine Louisville's going to sit him out, but, professional scorer, has all these tricks in the book, not necessarily a super high-level athlete. Knockdown shooter, though. Like, he's really improved as a shooter, and I think that he is going to get NBA looks for that reason alone. Is there anyone else? Chris Wilkes is someone that I kind of like. I've gotten really, really good reports from him, or about him, from UCLA and just kind of being around this area. 6'7", kind of developing his perimeter game. Straight line driver in high school, really good floater game, good athleticism, not a crazy amount of length, but really, really good athlete who I think if he develops the 3-point shot has a shot to potentially be one and done, but has a little bit of room to grow there.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of him recently. His shooting mechanics look pretty good. He has enough fluidity where I think it's projectable. I'm not sure what he can do off the dribble as far as pull-ups go. I know he's got that floater game. He seems more catch and shoot right now. I have no idea what he is on D. I haven't seen enough of him to have an opinion on that end. I know he has some length, and he has good size. It just kind of seems like he's a slighter build, like a lankier kind of guy. We'll see. Caught between kind of maybe the 3 and the 4. I haven't seen enough of him to have like a hard, fast decision or opinion on him.
Well, Cole, I think we're done here, man. I think that's about all we got.
Hey, we kept it under an hour and a half, so I think that's progress.
Yeah, 75 minutes on this show. We can go for like another 15 if you guys really want, but I'm sure that no one wants to hear our voice. Please remember, you can subscribe to the Game Theory podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, or I guess it's Apple Podcasts now, I'm sorry. All of those places. Thanks to Greats for sponsoring the podcast. It's always very appreciated. Cole, do you have anything you want to plug?
Yeah, just the Step In. We're going to launch probably late next week, so keep an eye open for that. If you haven't subscribed to the newsletter, you can go to thestepin.com and just enter your email, and we will get one more email out to people on Friday, I believe. We're going to do a kind of Q&A. If you want to ask any questions about prospects, we'll answer those. That's it. And keep listening to this podcast. I think we're probably going to do combo forwards next, so looking forward to it.
Yeah, guys like Michael Porter, Miles Bridges, some of those guys. I don't have a list in front of me right now, so my brain is broken. But thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. And until next time, we will talk soon. Bye.